from the News Channel 5 network, this is Open Line.
Good evening and welcome to Open Line. I'm reporter Chris Davis, and I'm going to be in the chair tonight with you talking about a really important topic, an effort to end domestic and sexual violence. And to help us navigate that topic, I want to welcome Kathy Walsh. She's the executive director for the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to be here.
First, if you could just kind of give us an overview about what your organization does.
Well, the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence is the state resource center on domestic and sexual violence in Tennessee. And so our membership, our programs like shelters and rape crisis centers and family justice centers, and other types of programs that provide services to domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims in communities. So we provide a lot of training and technical assistance to communities. We help them develop programs. We do public awareness campaigns, which we're going to talk about tonight. We provide emergency financial assistance for victims and some legal services for victims. And last but not least, we do the public policy work. So we work on legislation and policy that impacts victims.
Kathy, give people an idea, how big is an issue like these topics in Tennessee? I mean, I think a lot of people know that there are issues out there, but give people kind of an idea of how widespread this may be.
Well, when you think about the fact that 1 in 3 women are going to be a victim of domestic or sexual violence in their lifetime, that's a huge number. So it impacts so many people. Think about everybody that you know, your wife, your sister, your mother, your friends. You probably know people in your own life who have experienced violence. So it also impacts men. We have male victims of domestic violence. It impacts children who are living in homes where violence occurs. So in Tennessee, every year, we have around 70,000 calls to police related to domestic violence. Now, we also know that it's very underreported. So that's probably just scratching the surface. We only have 38 domestic violence shelters in Tennessee. We have 95 counties. We have 12 sexual assault programs. So we are really underserved with the types of programs that we need in the state. And often victims may have to travel across county lines and many miles to get to the shelter that's closest to them. So we have some great laws in Tennessee, but when it comes to funding to fund these critical services for victims, we are really far behind in that area.
Absolutely. And as if all of that wasn't enough, we now have a pandemic going on. I'm sure that has to impact your volunteer efforts, how your organization operates, and then the issue itself. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, domestic violence and COVID are not a good mix. Because we have victims who are trapped at home with their batterers because they're out of work, they can't leave, they're stuck in the home. Also, for some victims, they're afraid of leaving and going to a shelter, afraid that they might contract COVID there as well. Even though all of our programs follow very high health standards, we've seen a decrease in some areas with people being afraid to go to shelter. So being stuck at home, being afraid to go to shelter, that's a bad mix for domestic violence victims, because the more access that perpetrator has to you, the more violence that you're probably going to experience. And then you have children living in the home who are witnessing that violence, and they haven't been going to school. They don't have a safe refuge. So there is a lot of trauma that's happening in families across Tennessee.
Absolutely. So I know we're getting into the Be the Friend campaign season for you all. Talk about what that is and how people can get involved.
Right. Well, one of the things that we focus on is we really want to focus on prevention, because if we can prevent domestic and sexual violence from ever happening, that is the absolute best case scenario. So I'm really excited to talk about a social media campaign that we launched a few months ago. It's called Be the Friend, and it targets high school and young adults, high school, college-age children, with messages about what domestic and sexual violence is, how you can intervene in that situation safely, because I think that one of the things that we haven't done is prepare people. How do you respond if you see it happening? How do you respond if things start happening in your relationship and you're thinking maybe this isn't right? So, we know that 1 in 11 girls and 1 in 15 boys in high school have reported that they have experienced some kind of physical or sexual violence. Think about that. That's a really high number. So if we can catch this behavior early on, give teens the tools that they need to stop the behavior, to confront that behavior, then maybe we can prevent this from happening.
Kathy, I know a common excuse may be too harsh of a word, but oftentimes you hear people say, oh, you know what, that's their business, or maybe I don't have all the facts, I shouldn't say something. What would be your recommendation to people that may feel hesitant to speak out about something like this?
Right. Well, I think you bring up such a very good point. Because when you talk with groups about why didn't you intervene, the first thing they'll always say is, well, I wasn't sure what was really going on. I wasn't sure if I should tell somebody, or maybe I was afraid. I was afraid that if I stepped in, maybe that violence was turned toward me. So I think it's just normal in our culture that unless it's happening to you or somebody really close to you, that sometimes we've kind of just looked the other way. So the first thing I want to say is, to be aware of it, to educate yourself about what are those warning signs. And if you see something that doesn't look right, then depending upon that situation, there are things that you can do. If you're afraid for your safety, you're afraid for the safety of the other person, then certainly you want to call for help. Again, depending upon that situation, whether it's law enforcement or if you're at school talking to a teacher, if you feel like it's not safe to intervene. There could be times when you feel like you could intervene and try to distract the person who's getting a little abusive. Inserting yourself in that situation and saying, hey, what about this? Or, what's going on here? And give the victim time to get away. So that's something else that you can do, is try to distract that individual in that situation. I think it's hard to say what you're going to do in every single situation, because I think it's going to depend upon what is going on. So you can disrupt it in some way, have something else going on that's going to take that person's attention away. And again, I really think you don't want to act alone. So if you have friends or other people who are around, get those people involved too, so that you are not there by yourself. But there's also things that you can do. For example, let's say you're hanging out with your friends and they're saying things that are kind of inappropriate about girls. Being able to speak up and say, hey, that's not cool. Think about it, because if they were saying that about your mother or your sister or somebody like that. And I think part of this campaign is equipping young people with what are those things that you can say and that you can do.
You mentioned word choice being important in just everyday conversations, but I'm sure as someone that may be thinking about trying to find ways to intervene, that language plays an incredibly important role. How should you approach that? What kind of language should people be using?
Well, again, if you're talking to the person who's being abusive, being able to say, that behavior is not cool. Intervening, is everything okay here? What's going on? That kind of language. If you're talking with the victim, and I think this is really, really important. If you're communicating with the victim, you want to be sure and tell them it's not your fault. because a lot of times the victim thinks it's their fault. Help is available, not being judgmental, saying, this happens to a lot of people, and let's figure out where we can find some help for you.
Absolutely. It seems like in the scope of this conversation, a lot of this can involve dating violence, at a younger age. If parents are watching this broadcast, if they start to see some warning signs, how should they handle a situation like that?
Well, let's talk about what are some of those warning signs that they could see. So one of the things that we see now with this technology is, if the boyfriend or girlfriend is just burning up, that their girlfriend or boyfriend's phone with text, just texting you all the time. Where are you? What are you doing? Why haven't you returned my call? Just what's going on with that phone. If you see that, maybe your daughter was very outgoing and had a lot of friends and was involved in dance and sports, and now all of a sudden, the boyfriend wants her just to spend time with him, not with any of the friends. So it's that isolating type behavior. Very, very jealous behavior. If somebody's overly jealous, and accusing, the girlfriend or boyfriend of, being with other people, seeing other people. Because I think in this culture, a lot of times, we equate jealousy with, oh, that must mean he or she really likes me. That must mean they're in love with me. But if it is obsessive and controlling, those can actually be signs that this is an abusive individual.
Absolutely. Kathy, there may be some people that are watching this tonight and want to find ways to be able to help. Are there ways with the Tennessee Coalition where people, and this is where COVID sometimes probably comes into play too, but are there volunteer opportunities, or really is it about being a good friend too?
Well, I think it's, again, all of those things. We love to have volunteers at the coalition. And if you're interested in volunteering with us, we'd love to hear from you. Our programs across the state, our domestic violence shelters and rape crisis centers, they're always looking for volunteers that can work in those programs as well. I think educating yourself about dating violence, domestic violence, so that you can talk with your friends about it. We have some new PSAs on social media that's part of this Be the Friend campaign. Share those PSAs on your social media. Already we've had over 14 million, I think, impressions. We've had about 1.5 million people with each other. So spreading the word, putting these things on your social media, sharing them with your friends, talking about it, those are all things that people can do.
Absolutely. Just a reminder, if you're just joining us in, you can call in with your questions with a number right here on your screen, 615-737-7587. We're going to take a break for just a moment. We'll be back with more with Kathy after this.